If you like joinery, engineering, woodworking, and an Australian accent that you may not be able to understand, you're in the right place. The giant 3 meter dining table I'm going to make in this video is a perfect example of how engineering is a huge part of furniture design. I mean, look at the angle of those legs. This table should technically collapse under its own weight, but thanks to some fancy joinery, this table could also be used as a dance floor. Seriously. Now, I did make a major mistake with this original design, and I wish I could tell you that this mistake was catastrophic and that it almost ruined everything at the last minute, and you should wait to the end of the video to find out, as this all makes for effective storytelling. But unfortunately, this mistake, although major, was a super easy fix, and it actually made the table look better too. But in all honesty, this was a really interesting lesson in design. I'm still going to make you wait to the end though. But have a look at this picture and let me know if you can spot the problem. A big thank you to Britain Timbers for supplying the white oak for this dining table. If you'd like to know more about different timber species as well as other products, be sure to check out their website. Like with all woodworking projects, we begin with the milling phase. This is where you take big boards, make them smaller just to turn them into big boards again. Now, I think for a lot of people, this is a boring stage, and I agree to a certain extent. It is repetitive, but there is a level of excitement as you begin preparing the material for what's about to become your next creation. Board selection is one of the most vital parts to any build, and this is the part where you can really give some personality to your material. You can creatively move grain around by putting one board in this place and another board in that place. This is why you can have a bunch of different makers build the exact same piece, and even though it's the same design, each one will look different due to the grain and board selection. So you just saw me glue up the angled legs of the table, and these legs aren't only angled from the table top to the floor, they're also tapered, and this taper will add more appeal to the leg design. I didn't include the tapers in my first iteration, and notice that the legs not only look too bulky, but it made the table look static. Which sounds silly because this is a bloody big table, and you'll see once it's complete that there is a level of movement and weightlessness to this giant 3 meter by 1 meter oak table. Now, I'm using some leftover particle board to create a sled for my thickness planer, and this sled will allow me to add the necessary taper to the legs. This sled is a fairly common type of jig used when it comes to planer jigs. The only thing I'll say is it is important to have the workpiece fully supported, especially at the ends, as your planer adds a ton of downward pressure, and unsupported areas could result in an uneven surface or allow the board to move up and snap back down, potentially resulting in injury. Now, if you've seen my videos before, you will notice my workshop looks a little different, and that's because we're looking into the past. I built this table back in 2020 when I'd redone my workshop to this grey monotone workspace. I thought it would look cool, but I was wrong. Anyone that owns a shop knows that it evolves over time, and if you're as pedantic as I am, then when it changes dramatically. But I do have to say there are a few cool ideas, some that you might be able to use for your own workshop. So keep watching and let me know what parts you like. One of the things I love most about being a furniture maker is being able to design the pieces I make for clients. These days I have enough of a back catalogue of work that when a client comes to me, they can trust that they are going to get a unique piece. And yes, each piece that you see on my website or Instagram is a one-off, meaning there's only one of those in the world, and each one has been designed specifically for my client to their design brief. I've actually just released a video on my Patreon of how I design furniture as well as the main design practices I follow. This video is perfect if you're wanting to get better at design, as it will give an insight into design processes and principles. The video also goes through how I came up with the design for the table you see me making now. I do have to admit that I tend to get carried away when I design pieces. Generally speaking, I like to design things that I haven't seen or made before, which does present issues as a lot of times I finalize the design, get super excited about it, then ask myself the question, how the hell am I going to build this? Now, this might seem a little backwards to some, but in all honesty, this is my secret sauce to getting better at designing and building. But it can sometimes catch me out, like it did in this design. But first, I'll explain what's going on here. I've now cut angles to the tapered, angled legs. That's kind of confusing, but once again, all the design choices to these legs help to add to the weightlessness to this giant table. What you're seeing me do now is actually the most important piece of joinery in this entire build. In fact, this is where engineering meets woodworking. This cross-halving joint is not only going to attach the legs to the bottom rail, but it's also going to lock the legs into a fixed position, which is incredibly important in this design as the weight of the massive and heavy oak tabletop, combined with the steep angle of the legs, would collapse under its own weight. Now, needless to say, this joint needs to be cut perfectly, otherwise it's essentially useless. And anyone that's done one of these joints knows a perfect fit isn't always the easiest thing to do, let alone when the joint is on an angle and a taper, meaning the inside face of the leg and rail is at a 14-degree angle and the outside face of the leg and rail is at a 16-degree angle. I will admit that these days I don't use hand tools as much as I'd like. I find myself looking for other methods using my machinery to cut joinery, but to be fair, the accuracy of my machines are pretty amazing and the reality is they're faster most of the time. Now I say most of the time because in the time it takes to make or set up a jig, you could probably achieve the same result with a hand tool, but I would like to get back to more hand tool work, although the current workbench I have just isn't cutting it for me lately. So stay tuned as the video after my next video will be a custom Rubo style workbench, except I'm going to make some serious modifications to it to help turn the classic Rubo into a more modern day bench. So if you're interested in seeing this video and more videos from me here on YouTube, I would love it if you considered subscribing. I've said it before, but I still can't believe so many of you watch my videos, and it's actually thanks to your viewership as well as my Patreon account that has allowed me to focus more time on videos, which is something I absolutely love doing and hopefully something you love watching. Now, I'm sure you know the drill by now, but my Patreon has a heap of extra long and short form videos, not to mention nearly 2 extra hours of footage from this very build. It's also a great way to support these YouTube videos as I'm currently trying not to take on sponsors. So if you're interested in woodworking content that no one else is doing on YouTube, check out the link below. One of the best tricks to achieving these angled box joints is to use a timber block as a guide. The angle on the block is the same angle I want the joinery to be, and the chisel simply follows this angle. Now these angled box joints attach the bottom rail to the leg upright, which is a key visual design feature to this table, but it also serves 2 purposes. The first is it acts as a stabilizer to the bottom rail, and without this stabilizer, the bottom rail could easily move around under the weight of the tabletop. Its second purpose is to act as a backbone to the angled legs, providing extra support. The whole point of this design was to be as minimal as possible. Every single component of this table relies on one another to work. Now, one thing I do find helpful when cutting this type of joinery is to use my bandsaw to help remove some of the waste. This makes hand tool work much easier, but obviously you never want to do the final cut using a bandsaw, as the blade marks don't leave a fine enough finish for quality joinery. So I mentioned earlier I got caught out in this design, and the reason why basically comes down to the size of the tabletop, which weighs a lot, around about 90 kilograms. The intention behind this design was to have as minimal components as possible, but you may be able to see here that I'm missing 2 vital components. The first is that there isn't enough support for the center of the tabletop. See, the original theory behind this design was that the legs would securely attach to the tabletop and the top would act as its own rail system. which in theory would work for a much smaller table. But a tabletop of this size needs a support rail, otherwise the tabletop will dip due to its long 3-meter span. Now, those of you that are experienced with building large tables might be thinking that one center rail isn't going to support a table that's as wide as this, and you would be correct. That's where some clever engineering comes into play. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any footage of this, but in order to counteract the tabletop from dipping, I purposely milled in a bow into the boards that make up the tabletop, meaning that instead of the tabletop sitting flat, it would sit like this. Then gravity can take over, as well as a few fixings into the center rail. You can actually see right here that I had some packers under the boards during glue up, allowing all the bowed boards to get glued together evenly. Now, thankfully I picked up on this design flaw before I began cutting any wood, but unfortunately the second missing component wouldn't make itself known until this point, during assembly. Once I placed the 90-kilogram tabletop on the legs, I noticed something serious. I would have never have picked up on this during the design phase, but due to the weight of the top and the pressure it put down on the legs and bottom rail, it began to bend the bottom rail, which did put me into a bit of a panic. But once I settled myself down, I came up with a solution that wasn't only easy, but added to the overall look of the table. So it was kind of a win-win situation. The reason why this bottom rail was bending under pressure is because it wasn't thick enough to handle the weight. So I simply added another piece of oak and angled each end to tie it in with the rest of the design. Like all the table components, this piece is vital in the overall construction of the build and has a clever hidden secret. This is a custom top plate that will securely hold the legs in position as well as the leg upright. Now, holding these components in place is a fairly simple task, but where this top plate really stands out is about to be shown in this scene here. I'm routing in a rebate on the top of the plate. This rebate will sit inside the oak tabletop. I'm using a template that has been sized perfectly to suit the rebate on the top plate, and by using my router I'm able to remove all the necessary material. Now you might be asking, what is going on here? Well, the front and back edges of the rebated top plate sit snugly into a pocket on the tabletop, while being able to move side to side to allow the tabletop to expand and contract. But the reason why I want it to fit snugly in the front and back is because this top plate, which is attached to the legs, is firmly located into place, giving this heavy oak top and the angled legs nowhere to move. Everything is locked in position while also providing the necessary movement for expansion and contraction. This table is a perfect example of just how intricate furniture design can be. Not just in an overly complicated piece like this, but in everyday items we use. If you remove one leg from a chair, you're going to have a serious problem. As furniture makers and designers, we have certain parameters that we need to follow in order to achieve a successful end result, but this doesn't mean that your creativity has to take a back seat. When it comes to form versus function in furniture design, form follows function. No one is going to sit in an uncomfortable chair just because it looks cool. Thankfully, as furniture makers, we have the general rules of form already laid out for us. Dining tables have a standard height, so do bench tops and chairs. Granted, there is some wiggle room, but once you know the basic structure and measurements needed for your piece to hit its requirements, you can now invite the creative part of your brain to take over and really begin to experiment. The reason why I bring this up is because I feel like a lot of people think it's one or the other, form or function, which can stop people from pushing their creative side because they're more focused on the function of the piece. But in my opinion, form and function can work together. Because there's no bracing within the leg structure, I've had to insert some length of steel angle bars to the underside of the giant tabletop. Now, this steel will help to minimize any minor cupping that generally happens with wide wooden boards, but the reality here is it's just a helping hand. It's the prep work that goes into the material that helps to minimize any major movement. That's having correctly acclimated wood, having an understanding of the environment the piece is going to live in, the correct alternation of boards, adequate airflow around both faces, as well as evenly applying finish to both faces. I have actually seen wide timber slabs dramatically cup with steel bracing before, and that was because the material wasn't prepped properly. I have to say that watching this video back was a real blast from the past. Seeing how my workshop used to be set up compared to the way it is now aesthetically, but also from a production standpoint. I've moved a bunch of machines around for better workflow and purchased new equipment to make life a little bit easier. Looking back on this footage is a great reminder of what's been achieved in a short few years, and it makes me excited about what's to come.